The memory of that day stays with me. It lives in the air of my office, thick and unshakable. I was a younger man then, a relatively new teacher full of idealistic energy. Leo was one of those students who made the job easy. He was a polite, obedient boy in the 7th grade who always followed instructions. He wore a bright red jacket that day, a color so vibrant it seemed to pulse against the backdrop of the school bus as we departed at 12:30 p.m. We spent the first few hours at the amusement park in a blur of motion. I watched from the sidelines as my students transformed into streaks of color, running across the lawns and jumping on trampolines with infectious joy. It was a perfect day, the kind where the sun feels like a warm hand on your shoulder. Leo was in the middle of a high-energy game of tag with his friends. He was sprinting across the grass, laughing and dodging his classmates, when he tripped. He fell hard onto the ground, skidding a bit across the turf. For a moment he stayed there, catching his breath and brushing the grass from his red sleeves. When he sat up and looked straight ahead, his eyes landed on the great galleon. From his position on the ground, the ride looked massive. It was a giant swing boat that dominated the skyline, reaching toward the clouds with every arc. Seeing it from that low angle made it look even more powerful and exciting. A spark of curiosity lit up in his eyes. He pointed it out to his friends, and they all decided that they had to ride it before the day was over. As the clock neared 5 p.m., the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The light turned into a heavy, bruised orange. Leo and a group of about 12 students lined up at the gate of the galleon. There was a sign posted regarding safety. Minimum 5 feet and 40 kg weight. Leo was tall enough, his lanky frame easily hitting the mark, but we never truly verified his weight. He was thin, almost fragile beneath that bulky red jacket. The group finally reached the front of the line. Leo climbed into the very back row, the section that traditionally swings the highest. I stood about 30 yards away, watching as the operator engaged the safety bars. I remember thinking for a split second that the bar looked a bit loose across Leo's lap, but the machinery was already beginning its rhythmic metallic groan. The boat began to rock, a slow pendulum of steel against the darkening sky. By the third swing, something changed. Every time the boat reached its apex and plummeted back down, Leo's body seemed to lift too far from the seat. His legs flailed as if he was trying to catch the floor of the boat, but it wasn't there. He wasn't screaming in joy anymore. He was screaming for the operator to stop, but his voice was swallowed by the mechanical roar and the cheers of the students in front of him. To the rest of the class, he was just another silhouette in the air. But he was actually making a desperate attempt to find a handhold on the smooth fiberglass. I saw his face for a fleeting second when the boat reached its highest point. His eyes were wide, fixed on the ground below, as if he were already falling. He tried to tuck his feet under the bar, but the physics of the ride were working against him. On the next downward plunge, the momentum became too much. The gap between his body and the seat widened until there was nothing left to hold him. Then, the unthinkable happened. As the boat swung downward, Leo was thrown from the ride. He didn't land on the padding. He struck the sharp industrial edge of the metal stairs leading up to the platform. The impact was sickening. His leg was shattered instantly. Because he had been in the very back and because the ride was so loud, a few agonizing minutes passed before the operator realized what had happened. The ride continued to swing for 3 more full rotations, the empty seat in the back row a haunting gap. When Leo hit the ground and looked straight, he saw the great galleon one last time. From the floor where he lay, he watched the boat swing high above him, the same machine he had looked at with such curiosity only an hour before. Now, it was just a giant shadow passing over him again and again. Before the brakes finally screeched to a halt by the time the staff and I reached him, the ground was stained dark. Leo was barely responding. He had lost too much blood. His breathing was shallow and ragged. I knelt in the dirt, my hands shaking as I tried to use my own belt as a makeshift tourniquet. The other students were being ushered away, their joyous shouts replaced by a hollow, echoing silence. We carried him to the park's small first aid room. We laid Leo on a narrow cot, his red jacket now soaked a deep maroon. I kept talking to him, telling him he was a good student, but his eyes were fixed on the ceiling, unfocused and fading. The ambulance ride to the hospital was a blur of blue lights. I sat in the front seat, staring at my hands, which were stained with blood. I kept thinking about how a few minutes of fun had turned into a nightmare. But he was not breathing by the time we reached the emergency bay. He was declared dead at the hospital. The aftermath was a storm of investigations. They found that the ride's safety mechanism had a minor flaw that only became dangerous when someone of Leo's light build sat in the rear row. It was a 1-in-a-million fluke, but that didn't bring him back. I was promoted to principal a few years later. My office is quiet now, but sometimes when the wind catches the school gate, it makes a creaking sound. It mimics the swing of that boat. I often find myself staring at the empty chair across from my desk, imagining a polite boy in a red jacket sitting there. The amusement park has been closed since that day. The great galleon still sits there, rusting under a tarp, a giant steel ghost. The grass has grown long around the metal stairs where he fell. Some people say the land is cursed, but I think it's just tired. It's carrying the weight of a story that ended too soon. A memory of a day that started at noon and ended in a darkness that never truly lifted.
Okay, so this isn't strictly my story, but the whole thing involves my grandpa and my great aunt, a sister. But since they're no longer with us anymore, it's one of the most horrifying true stories I've ever heard. And I figured I'm within my rights to tell it. My grandpa grew up during the Great Depression in a really poor town out in Oklahoma. I mean, the way my mom tells it, they really didn't have a pot to pee in. They used to eat stuff like dandelion salad, literally just eating boiled eggs with wild dandelions. They were that broke. Even worse for my grandpa and great aunt, who were like 12 and 8 years old, respectively at the time. There's absolutely nothing to keep them entertained. They made a good go of it, turning pieces of junk into toys. Like never see that old-timey thing of a kid wiping a bike tire along with a stick. Yeah, that kind of thing. Their childhoods were just not like ours. They were accustomed to extreme boredom, grinding poverty, and back-breaking labor. So you can guess how excited they got when they heard the carnival was coming to town. There'd be games, rides, candy, sideshows, absolutely everything a kid that age could ever want. The only thing was, their family didn't have the money for them all to go. Just enough for 2 entry tickets with a little left over for cotton candy. So being the good folks they were, my great-grandparents decided they'd give the kids the money while they stayed home. Must have been like all their Christmases had come at once. The only condition was that my 12-year-old grandpa was not allowed to let my 8-year-old great-aunt out of his sight. Then on the evening in question, Grandpa and Great Honor given like 50 cents between them and told me back by sundown. Then they ran off down the pasture where the carnival had been given permission to set up the way my dad tells it for the first hour. So Grandpa and Great Aunt had the time of their lives. I think tickets were like 5 cents or something. Then cotton candy was 2 cents apiece. Basically, the parents had underestimated how expensive stuff would be, so they were able to partake in everything the carnival had to offer twice. Maybe that's what led them to a false sense of security, because it certainly accounts for them staying long after the sun started to set. Only when my grandpa realized how late it was, and he started looking around for my great aunt. She was nowhere to be seen. I want to remember asking my dad why they just thought it was okay to let their kids go running around in their own like that. If it's just like an old-timey thing, or because they were so poor. Dad said it was more like because all the people going to the carnival were their neighbors. They didn't figure there was any risk. But then there's my grandpa, totally unable to find his sister, and he's starting to get worried. He started asking all the people he recognized from our town if they'd seen his sister, but they all said no. Right up until one of our neighbors said they saw my great aunt walking hand in hand with the grown-up. I think they figured it was my great-grandpa or something. But when my grandpa explains that his dad isn't even there, this guy launches into action to try and help find my great heart. So Grandpa and this random neighbor guy apparently ran away with the actual carnival and towards where the workers had set up their trailers and whatnot. That's when they heard a girl crying from inside of them. The neighbor tries to open the door, but it won't budge. So he starts banging on it. Some evil son of a gun opens the door and tries to explain it away by saying my great aunt got lost or something, that she's just inconsolable, crying in a way that Grandpa had never seen before. Scared, but sad at the same time. This neighbor then rushes my grandpa and great aunt home and tells their parents all about what had happened. My grandpa knows something bad happened to my sister, but it just doesn't know what, because she won't talk about it. Obviously, my great-grandpa was absolutely furious. So he grabs a shotgun, rounds up a few buddies, and they went down to the carnival to basically do God knows what to the sky. Again, this is all from my dad. But according to him, this huge fight starts at the carnival. People on all sides almost get shot. Then they all freeze after the carnival chief fires a gun into the air. He then agrees to parley with my great-grandpa. That after talking for like 10 minutes in some weird-looking corny trailer. As great-grandpa walks away from the carnival empty-handed. Everyone thought he was crazy. Some monster had just put his hands on his only daughter, and after a short powwow with the man in charge, he was happy to just walk away. His buddies confront him on it, obviously wanting to know what the deal was. My great-grandpa apparently tells him to put a sock in it, because it's all been ironed now. That night, my great-grandpa apparently puts on his boots and headed down to the carnival one more time before it left town. It meets up with this carny chief, who asks if my great-grandpa still wants satisfaction, which he obviously did. The carny chief beckons to two workers who carry out like a basket or something before laying it in front of my great-grandpa, and they invited him to open the lid. He complied, and when the smell hit him, I doubt he had it in him not to puke, because according to my dad, the carnies had stacked the offending worker's separate head on a pile of his own guts, and his own junk had been stuffed into his mouth. The carny chief then told him, while pointing at his junk, "First we cut off this, then we cut out those, then point to the guy's guts." Only when he stopped moving do we cut off that, then points to his head. Apparently after that, the carny chief once again asked my great-grandpa, "Are you satisfied?" He just nodded, turned, and then walked away. The carnival was gone the next day. I think he told my great-aunt what happened to that guy too, because she never seemed to turn off about it. No, something really bad must have happened. They killed the guy, but she actually went back to the carnival the next time it came around and borrowed a phase from my son, I guess. They were built different back then and just dealt with trauma differently or whatever. Or maybe it's much easier to get over this sort of thing when you know the guy who did it suffered on Earth before he died. I suppose that's what freaks me out so much about my grandpa's story. That almost sounds like it came from a different country or something. All that poverty and vigilante justice. I just don't recognize that same kind of thing in America today. Not in such an extreme way anyways. And that sure had me counting my blessings, let me tell you.
It was a standard afternoon at a Western-themed amusement park near Anaheim, California. My cousins and I had decided to spend the day together, as we were all reaching adulthood and realized we hadn't visited a theme park as a group since our childhood. Everything felt normal at first. The California sun was intense, the queues for the attractions were long, and after a full day of walking across the park, our feet were incredibly sore. We planned to stay until the very last minute before closing, so we found ourselves waiting in line for a roller coaster that overlooked the children's area while we discussed our next move. While we stood in the long queue, 3 distinct popping sounds echoed through the air. At first, we assumed they were just fireworks or typical park noises. My cousin's boyfriend even made a light-hearted joke that someone had just been shot. We didn't take it seriously and continued waiting for our turn on the ride. Suddenly, a massive wave of people began sprinting through the children's section. I initially thought a popular ride had finally reopened and guests were rushing to get a spot, but then a much larger crowd followed. I watched in confusion as parents shoved their children into bushes and ride operators frantically cleared people off active attractions. Everyone around us was panicked and demanding to know what was happening. The situation turned chilling when a voice came over the ride speakers, instructing everyone to get down because there was an active shooter. We ducked down immediately, paralyzed by fear. My oldest cousin's boyfriend began whispering that we needed to find a way out, but our position in the line was elevated and looked directly toward the area people were fleeing from, making us feel like exposed targets. After a minute of huddling there, a girl positioned above us urged us to abandon the line and run. We scrambled down the ramps, passing a distraught mother holding her 2 sobbing children. She looked me in the eyes and confirmed through her tears that this was not a drill. That was the moment the gravity of the situation truly hit me. We ran toward a wall and crouched there for cover. I began to pray that my family and I would make it out alive. My oldest cousin started calling her parents while the sounds of crying children filled the air around us. Realizing we couldn't stay stationary, we got up and headed toward the back of the park to locate emergency exits. My cousin's boyfriend tried to ask a staff member for directions, but the employee appeared to be in shock, staring back with a blank expression and offering no help. We decided to follow a large group toward the horse trails, where the stagecoaches usually run. We sprinted up a ramp on the trail to try and reach the front of the park, but we were suddenly ordered to turn back and stay low. The crowd became a chaotic mess of bodies thrashing around until everyone finally sat down on the ground. From our vantage point, I could see police units gathering outside the gates. Most of the park's lights had been cut, leaving only the decorative lighting on. It felt like we were sitting ducks. If the shooter was inside, we were trapped in a high, visible area with nowhere to hide. I called my mother to explain what was happening. She desperately told me to leave the area, but she didn't realize that moving in any direction might put me directly in the path of the shooter. I looked around at the hysteria. One father was having a complete emotional breakdown because he had been separated from his daughter. A young girl was weeping because she was alone and responsible for her little brother. The most heartbreaking sight was a small boy who had come to the park for his birthday. He was sobbing and saying he just wanted to see his father again. I tried my best to comfort him, telling him he would be okay and would see his dad soon, but I emphasized that he had to stay quiet and stay behind us for safety. To make matters worse, one of my cousins had allowed her younger sister to wander off with friends earlier while we waited for the coaster, and we had no idea where they were. They eventually ran off on their own to search for her. We remained stuck on that trail for nearly 20 minutes. My youngest cousin was crying, and her sister was on the verge of a breakdown watching her. It was pure chaos. Eventually, a group of people moved past us to cross a bridge, and we followed them to the bottom of the ramp. There, an employee finally met us and explained that the incident had been a drive-by shooting outside and that it was now safe to exit. We walked out of the gates completely shaken. My mother warned us over the phone to remain vigilant. As we headed to the car, once we reached the parking lot, we checked on my other cousins. They had successfully found their sister and her friends hiding in a candy shop, alongside dozens of other crying children. Once we finally reached the freeway, The tension broke, and we could breathe again. The entire ordeal was deeply traumatic. Although we might not have been in immediate physical danger in hindsight, the uncertainty of the shooter's location and the sheer panic of the crowd left a lasting mark. It was a long time before any of us felt comfortable stepping foot in an amusement park again.
There was an amusement park about 5 miles from my place named Wonder Island, and there were many occasions that I had heard kids in my school bragging about going there with their parents and how great it was. I was the kind of kid who was always scared of taking risks, so you can just say I was terrified of heights, so I never thought of going there. One day, guys in my friend circle were deciding on an outing for the weekend. I was more like an indoor person, so I didn't have any suggestions for them. Thinking there wasn't much of my need in the decision making anyway, I went to the bathroom. When I returned, I saw grins on each of their faces, so I figured they might have come up with whatever they would do. I didn't ask them about it because I was sure that I would not go with them, looking at how much of a drag outing seemed. Let me tell you something about my friends. If I were to describe them in one word, it would be crazy. And if you were to ask me to describe them more clearly, I would be saying, as mad as the Hatter. And trust me, this is not an exaggeration. I became sure about this when they blackmailed me into going by threatening me with revealing my math test score to my mother, which, by the way, I failed. My capability to understanding math was not equal to that of Nobita. Since I was more scared of Mom's wrath than heights, I agreed on going with them. Those evil bastards. One of these days I'm going to get back at them. Enough about my wits and anger. As I mentioned earlier, the plan was for the weekend, but those idiots said we would be meeting in the evening time at Ethan's house. Taking permission from my parents wasn't much of a hassle. Moreover, they were surprised that I was taking an interest in something normal like other kids. Their only condition was that someone responsible needed to accompany us, which was Liam's elder brother, Oliver, who volunteered to drive us to the park. Calculating all the delays and traffic took us almost an hour and a half to reach there. It was my first time visiting an amusement park. Otherwise, I'd only seen them in movies, TV series, or cartoons, and I was kind of impressed by all the rides. But not enough to get on them, and the crowd was also getting on my nerves. Trust me, other kids and people were almost pushing us to the entry crowd, making me feel like we were driving on a local bus. As other kids were enjoying all the thrilling and dangerous looking rides, I stuck to the ones that were slow and looked safe. I say I did well for the first time, but as I was trying to enjoy myself all the while holding on to my social anxiety, I noticed a strange woman looking at me and grinning. Trust me, she was the weirdest creature I had ever seen. She had messy hair with a few missing teeth. At first, I shrugged it off, thinking it to be just my imagination. But when I continued seeing her wherever I went, it freaked me out. It felt as if the creepy lady was following me. I didn't want to look scaredy cat to my friends, so I didn't tell them about it. At one point, when everyone was a bit tired from all that ride, we regrouped and decided to have some ice cream. We played rock, paper, scissors to pick who would be the one to get the ice cream for the rest of us, and unfortunately, it was me. I walked to the ice cream corner, which was a bit far from the spot everyone else was, so I was feeling a bit nervous looking at that woman stalking me and all. And my fear was right when she approached me at the store while addressing me as son. I acted as if I didn't hear her, but the more I played ignorant toward her, her tone started getting harsh, which was now giving me goosebumps. Can you believe a 30-something woman trying to harass a 9-year-old kid? The moment the ice cream man handed me those ice creams I'd been waiting for, I turned to leave, but was startled when I felt someone grabbing me. I didn't need to turn around to see it was that woman asking if I wanted to go someplace nice with her. It felt so horrifying that my entire body started to tremble. I tried to get away from her grasp, but she just tightened her grip. After struggling for a few minutes, I felt tears forming in my throat and started wailing. My hysterical cry was filling up the surroundings, and every eye started to land on me and the strange woman. But I guess they might think of me as some bratty kid who wasn't listening to her mother. I tried to pull my hand from her, but she said in an unbelievably arrogant tone, "Enough, son. We need to get going now." Her tone was loud enough for other people to hear it loud and clear, making it obvious to them that we had relations with each other. As I tried to say that she wasn't my mom, she put her palm over my mouth. That was when I saw Oliver coming in our direction, and he noticed my possible abduction by this psycho. He ran toward me and pulled me by my hand, asking what in the world she was trying to do. His strength was enough to let the woman's hand loose, and I rushed by his side and hid behind him. Now it was clear that the crazy lady was up to no good, and people started talking. But before anyone could catch and question her, she ran away. I could tell that if it wasn't for my safety, Oliver would have gone after her. But looking at my frightened face, he didn't. We got back to the others, and I noticed that I had dropped the ice cream bag when I was struggling to get away from her. I didn't speak the rest of the way to anyone, and no one even tried to make me speak since Oliver had informed everyone what had happened. Judging by their faces, they all seemed scared, but I was sure that it was nowhere near how I was terrified. I asked Oliver not to tell this to my parents, and neither did I. Instead, I just said the experience was horrible, and I wouldn't want to go anywhere like that again. It's been over 10 years now. I've become a bit braver now, but the trauma that incident created in my mind still lingers. Passing through an amusement park still brings back those memories. If it wasn't for Oliver, God knows what she might have done to me. But I know now that I'm ready to face such dangers if I were to get in a similar situation again.
It is every kid's dream to go to Disney World. It is a dream that a lot of American kids never get to have come true, let alone British kids. So, I always felt extremely fortunate and privileged that my parents were not only financially capable of taking our family over to Florida for a couple of weeks, but also that they actually put the time aside to do something like that. In all likelihood, they probably didn't want to. I mean, no offense to anyone that does, but what kind of actual grown-up wants to spend all that time queuing up for rides in the baking hot sun after paying for overpriced churros and chocolate sauce? That is not even touching on the pure scam that is Disney dollars. But still, my parents relented to my sisters and my pleas to take us all the way across the Atlantic to arguably the craziest state in the Union, Florida. This happened a long time ago, back in 1998. So excuse me if I misremember any details about the park itself. But I remember the year pretty clearly because the game StarCraft had just come out, and I was fortunate enough to pick up a copy in the US before it was even commercially available in the UK. To 10-year-old me, Florida was like the land of the lost or something. I mean, it had actual dinosaurs such as alligator farms, where you could feed the big old beasts with hunks of meat. That was something I was way too scared to do myself, but I was only too happy to watch my dad do it before he scampered away down the wooden walkway, like he was regressing into a childlike state out of pure primal fear. It was the land of Tropicana, where the food portions dwarfed those in the UK, and the grass and trees were so different and fantastical that I might as well have landed on a paradise alien world. It was the Sunshine State in name and in nature. And of course, it was the home of the most magical place in the entire universe, Disney World. But it was during our third and final day trip to Disney World that something happened that I didn't properly understand until I was a great deal older. The truth of which my parents tried their best to shield me and my little sister from for as long as they could, and this is how it happened. So, I remember we were in the Animal Kingdom part of the park. I was always really interested in natural history when I was growing up, so I was particularly excited to see this part of Disney World, and was incredibly happy and excited to be there. I had to wait 3 whole days at Disney before we finally got to see that particular part of it. Every other kid there seemed to be just as happy as I was, all except one. On the shuttle bus out at the park, I remember seeing this one little girl with her dad, who looked uncharacteristically miserable for a kid who actually had the good fortune to be visiting Disney World. But I mean, there is always one moody kid out of the bunch, isn't there? One who never seems to have any fun, no matter what is happening. So honestly, as confused as I was about it, I forgot about it pretty quickly, as my own excitement at seeing all the animals quickly overwhelmed me. My favorite Disney film was The Lion King, so go figure, I was buzzed. Throughout the day, whether we were on the rides, or on the little safari tour thing, or eating at one of the cafes there, I would see this little girl and her dad, and she looked consistently exhausted and unhappy. I found myself starting to point, to the extent that my mom and dad told me to stop staring at other kids because it was rude. So I did, because I knew they were right. Of course, it was rude to stare, and besides that, the little girl seemed awfully upset, and surely me just staring at her would only make it worse. A little while later, I remember walking along, drinking one of those ginormous American zillion-ounce sodas or whatever, happy as Larry, when I saw the little girl and her dad in front of us. I'm not going to pretend to be all like I knew. Something was wrong, or that I sensed it. Because I didn't. Not at all. But one thing struck me as kind of odd about the whole thing. By the time I was 10, I hated holding my mom or dad's hand. As I used to say, it was what babies did. And like me, this little girl didn't seem all that keen on holding her dad's hand. At one point, she even tried to shake it loose, but he kept holding on to her. And at one point, he started properly gripping her wrist and telling her that she needed to behave herself. I obviously found this kind of distressing, and I looked up at my dad as if to ask if he was seeing this, half expecting to be told to stop staring again. Both my parents looked kind of concerned about what was going on, but I didn't dare say anything. I was old enough to know that some kids misbehave sometimes, and the people around had that kind of cringy pretend it is not happening kind of feeling about them. Only then, instead of just calming down, the little girl just burst into tears and started wailing that she wanted her mommy. She kept repeating that she wanted her mommy while the guy tried his best to calm her down, telling her that they would get her to her mommy soon, alongside all this other stuff that he was saying to quiet her. What happened next is kind of a blur in my memory. There was just a lot of commotion, but this is how my dad tells the story from his perspective. Suddenly, while the little girl was wailing, my dad heard her blatantly ask for her daddy and demand to know where her daddy was. The way he tells it, the mood in the crowd around us visibly shifted as it suddenly became obvious that this guy who had been taking her around the park was not her father at all. There was a slight hesitation, though. No one actually acted on the revelation for the first few minutes or so, and for good reason. The guy might have been her uncle, a family friend, a legal guardian, or a carer. There was nothing evidently insidious about it at first glance. That was until the guy snapped at her in a way that was distinctly unparental. Apparently, some other American dad stepped in and asked if there was a problem, or something along those lines. The guy was quick to calm the situation down by telling the onlookers that there was no problem, and that the little girl was just having a temper tantrum. Then someone directly asked if the guy was actually the girl's father, to which he apparently replied that he was, before trying again to reassure the gathering crowd that everything was okay and that she was simply throwing a tantrum. Now, the next part I remember pretty clearly, because the girl shouted something right before the man with her clamped his hand over her mouth so hard that it sounded like a loud slap. My mom immediately started pulling me and my sister away from the scene, since it was starting to turn ugly, like really ugly, really fast. According to my dad's version of the events, what the girl had screamed before the guy tried to shut her up was that he wasn't her dad at all, and not only that, but that he had taken her. That is when it starts getting confusing for me again, because all kinds of people started moving forward and blocking my view, and all the shouting and moving kicked off. But I do remember seeing this tubby woman shoving her way through the crowd of people with that same little girl in her arms, who by that point was just sobbing uncontrollably. After that, I remember seeing the crowd that had formed around the guy begin to sway and shift. There were shouts and screams. I mean, like the kind of screams that were so intense and frightening that they made me shake and shiver with fear, and had my little sister bursting into tears. By the time park security showed up, who 10-year-old me just assumed were the actual police, the crowd began to disperse. And I distinctly remember seeing the man who had apparently taken the little girl from God knows where pinned to the ground, with someone holding him down on top of him. That is about the only part that I can remember crystal clear to this day. A lot of my memory has been filled in with my mom and dad's subsequent retelling of the event. But the image of that guy's rage, and how it twisted up in his features, is still burned into my mind, and it has been made all the more sinister by the fact that I now know exactly what he was so angry about. He had taken that girl and kept her pliant because he had promised her a trip around Disneyland. She was probably so keen to go that she just hadn't fought back initially, and God knows what he was intending to do with her afterward. But that chance had been taken away from him by a bunch of do-gooders. At least that is the way I imagine he thought of it. He was playing this sick, long game of lulling his prey into a false sense of security before he finally got his way with her. Not that I realized any of that at the time. To 10-year-old me, it was all just this big mess of confusion and fear, accompanied by the heavy knowledge that whatever was going on was just very, very wrong. We have no idea what happened to the man or the little girl after that day. No one spoke of it again for the rest of the holiday, and I am pretty sure it was almost 5 or 6 years before one of my parents finally brought it up with me and explained exactly what the situation had been. As far as I knew back then, all I had seen was a dad mistreating his daughter, who had then been arrested for it. Even to this day, it screws with my head that one of the worst things I have ever witnessed happened in what was billed as the happiest place on earth, and how, if things had gone just a little differently, that girl could have ended up as a corpse, or worse. A few days later, and none of us would be any the wiser. Thank God she spoke up when she did. Thank God that there were people there that reacted the way they did, because I really do not want to think about what the alternative could have been.
My boyfriend and I were driving home from Universal Studios, Florida, in Orlando, late last night. We ended up on a route we had never taken before, which led us deep into a desolate area that felt like the middle of nowhere. His car has a broken speedometer, so he relies on the odometer to track his fuel. He has to manually reset the miles after every trip to the pump. This detail became a major source of stress when we noticed we had hit the 130-mile mark. We were traveling down a completely deserted road, without another soul in sight. We were running low on fuel, but there were no gas stations visible anywhere in the darkness. I searched for the nearest station on my phone, and we headed toward one, only to find it was closed. Feeling the pressure, we located another station about 5 minutes away. As we pulled back onto the empty road, things started to get strange. My boyfriend believed he had secured the gas cap, but we suddenly heard a loud bang. He realized he had left the cap off, so he pulled over onto the dark shoulder to search for it. Miraculously, he discovered the cap was still somehow attached to the car. We got back on our way toward the next station, but I was suddenly overcome by a horrible, intrusive thought that something was going to go wrong there. I tried to ignore the feeling because we were stuck with no other options. It wouldn't have been able to reach us in such a remote spot. When we arrived at the station, the lights were only partially on. The road ended there in a dead end, meaning the only way out was to turn left or go back the way we came. My boyfriend stepped out of the car to check the pumps, and at that moment, my sense of dread intensified to a level I had never experienced, even though I have survived dangerous situations in the past, including being followed and witnessing tragic accidents. This felt different. My stomach dropped completely. Suddenly, a white car appeared on the empty road, pulling up to the intersection. The driver noticed my boyfriend, then backed up slowly with his windows rolled down. Seeing him watch my boyfriend in his sports car sent me into a total panic. I began screaming my boyfriend's name as loud as I could. When the man realized I was also in the car, he quickly turned left and sped away into the night. It was too dark to catch his license plate. The experience was more frightening than words can describe. I was terrified that I was about to watch my boyfriend get robbed or worse, especially since my intuition had warned me just minutes before. We eventually found a busier station with other people around, and made it home safely. Later, my dad mentioned that the specific road we were on is notorious for being a place where bodies are frequently discovered. I truly hope no one else ever finds themselves in that position, and I hope the man who was watching us never gets the chance to hurt anyone.